as well. So I want to introduce our next guest, Kyle Chapman. Kyle, if you can come on forward. Kyle is not currently banned by Russia that we know of. So that's probably the first part of your bio. But the second part of the bio, maybe the most interesting piece, is your role at Barry-Wehmiller Group as the president since August of 2020. And we're going to hear a bit about the organization first, and then we'll have a dialogue about how to think of these questions.
Absolutely. Peter, I was really excited to come here because I think Barry-Wehmiller weaves through virtually every topic that you're going to talk about until you put margarita slides up, which essentially said I'm doomed to fail. So, Margarita, we're going to have to talk about those
We're going
statistics.
to run a quick IQ test here in a short bit. And
yeah. I mean, woo! If you see me walking around like this later, come on, just help me out. Give me a pep talk. But really happy to be here to explain more about Barry-Wehmiller and how we've been able to transition as a it's a family-run, family-owned business. My name's Kyle Chapman, been president for just over 3.5 years. I am the youngest of 6 kids and the only family member working in Barry-Wehmiller. That was by design. And so before we do that, as family business owners, as business leaders, as people that participate in the business community, I want to make sure you understand the real crisis that we face. Not this silver tsunami transition, not et cetera, but the stuff we face every day. And if you look at these statistics, which I'm sheepish to put up in front of a bunch of researchers, 78% of the people that work for you feel like they work for a company that doesn't care about them. 74% of people say work is the leading cause of stress, and stress is the leading cause of heart attacks, chronic illness, et cetera. So you can use thought and say we are technically killing people in our businesses. That's not good. You see that your supervisor is more important to your health than your pediatrician, than your physician. In fact, if asked, most people would forego a raise if they could fire their leader. Who's here with their leader today? Yeah. Woo! Tough discussion. So our mission, what you're going to hear a lot today is you're going to hear Barry-Wehmiller talk about our mission is to prove, in fact, that business can be the most powerful source for good in the world if we simply know how to care for the people that entrust their lives to us. It's that simple. Just like you care for your family, we should be doing it for our employees. And unfortunately, most people aren't. The other thing that you're all talking about is how good family business is for the economy. We represent a significant part of GDP, right? Significant part of the employees work in the workforce work for family businesses. We're hiring more people. But the issues that we're talking about here is we don't know how to kind of transition the business very well. You can see most people don't have a good succession plan like Margarita was talking about. In fact, you can see that only 30% survive from first generation to second generation, and I'm a third generation leader and the numbers get worse. It's 12%. I've got a hack on that. I'm going to show you a little bit later how to defy those odds. So real quickly, Barry-Wehmiller, I just want to throw this up because you have to have a vision of where you're going, right? You have to understand who you are and what you're trying to do in this world and what we are trying to do. When you talk about maintaining the ethos of culture, Peter, that is my one job. My dad is kind of a force of nature in the cultural world and business. And one of the things that I said will never change despite me taking over as leaders, we will measure success by the way we touch the lives of people. That is our why, that is our foundation, that is the filter through which we make all of our decisions. The other stuff on here is where we're trying to go. We're trying to do a lot of things normal businesses are trying to do. Have a great strategy, innovate, do M&A, perform at a high level. We have a scoreboard, right? People want to know where you're trying to go as an organization. Most times I find private companies, family-owned businesses, you don't need to know that information. That's not relevant for you. That's BS. They want to know what they're doing matters, and they want to know how they're contributing to something greater than themselves. What I hope to do is if we can attack the things on the left, achieve the things on the right, that will be a proof point in the world that people in performance can exist in harmony, not one in sacrifice of each other. And secondly, if we attract, retain, develop the best leaders in the world, we will have the best performance. So that's what we're trying to do. And I've got like 2 minutes to go through a 140-year history of our organization. But real quickly, prior to 1987, my grandfather came into the business in the mid-50s. He took ownership in the mid-60s. My dad joined in the late 60s. My grandfather passed away in the mid-70s. My dad took over at 29. There, I've gone through a 3-hour presentation. The business was single product line, serving the making bottle washers and pasteurizers, serving Anheuser-Busch and other brewing. No balance, no future, really a crappy business. My dad took hold of it when his dad died unexpectedly, grew it substantially from 20 million to 75 million, and everything that he thought was going well started to tarnish a bit. In 1987, again, there's a case study on this. This is a 3-hour presentation. He was able to do an IPO for part of his business, pay down some debt, and start over in 1987 with the same business he had taken over from my grandfather. So it went from 18 to 75, IPO, we're back down to 18 in 1987. Here's my hack. This is the rebirth of Barry-Wehmiller. The Barry-Wehmiller before 1987 really didn't exist, so I'd like to say I'm a second generation leader because that increases my odds by like 3.5 times. So as you think about Barry-Wehmiller, my dad is sitting here. He's had no balance of customers, technology, et cetera. He said, I've got to build a vision for the future. I want to build a packaging equipment business, $100 million. So he went out and started acquiring them. In the late 90s, he realized work can be fun. He wrote a book called Everybody Matters. He has a series of epiphanies where he realized engaging people's heads and hearts and not just their hands is what really ignites the vibrancy of an organization. And he started testing this and testing it. We started diversifying, not just from packaging. We got into paper and converting, and I'll show what all these means. We launched our hybrid equity investing arm, BW Foresight Partners. That's what I came back to do. So we keep growing and growing. We start penetrating Europe, et cetera. And now we're a $3.5 billion organization that has successfully transitioned from my dad to me. He's still here, by the way. He's not gone. He's still very involved in very positive ways. But in that entire growth, we pursued culture, we pursued balance, we pursued a business model that could sustain anything. We went through 08, 09, everybody remembers how terrible that was, and didn't lay anyone off. We came out of it stronger than we entered it. So it was a great period of time. So the business model today is balanced. About a third of our business is highly engineered equipment. A third is the parts and services related to that equipment. And a third is expert consulting services. We're organized in 5 platforms. There's a lot, this is an eye chart, I apologize. We serve a broad spectrum of markets. These are the type of stuff that comes off of our equipment or results from our services. I'm sure we touched you sometime today, given the toilet paper on the left. We make a bunch of stuff that you engage with on a day-to-day basis. But when we think about what I came back to do 15 years ago was to launch a different model. So I came back and started with my partner, BW Foresight Partners, which is a hybrid equity investing. Hybrid is the key word. And what you see up there is we were trying to balance 3 different pools of buyers: private equity, corporate, and family office. And we tried our best to pick the best parts of each. Patience, right? Operating value, equity ownership with employees. What we tried to avoid, high leverage, short-termism, et cetera. And we've successfully built close to $1 billion organization doing that. And these are some of the things we're going to talk about. I went through real fast.
That was impressive. That was impressive. You must have a strong IQ. Strong IQ on this.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
So,
see, Margarita?
Averages, they're averages, as we heard from Margarita. So this is really helpful. I want to start by thinking of the choice to sell versus to keep it within family. You, as a company, as an organization, have decided to keep it as a family-owned entity. And yet you're interacting a lot of times with people that are deciding to sell or wanting to transition out of a form of ownership. What do you think are the factors that the kind of firm that you would be purchasing should be thinking about whether they should hold it for a longer period of time, or whether or not they should sell it, whether it's to you or to someone else?
Yeah, I'll talk about the things you should think about, but then I want to go back to the decision to sell or not to sell. So obviously, do you have the right leadership? Have you thought about kind of what's the next level of leadership look like? And it doesn't have to be family, right? Do you have professional leadership? It could be family, it could be outside. And we found success in both. The other thing is, are you the best owner still? Right? Might you be too conservative and not willing to go on the digital adventure everybody's talking about now? Right? Maybe you're being other consolidators are acquiring around you, and your scale isn't big enough to compete. Those are things you have to consider. All right. One of the things that's the issue, though, is that people view the act of selling as very binary. It's either I'm running this thing, nobody's in it with me, and I'm going at it alone, or I'm out. I'm selling 100%. And what we tried to do with Barry-Wehmiller overall and with our hybrid equity group is to wedge, there's a wonderful place to live in between, that you can find a partner that can help you unlock the full potential of your organization without putting it on the transaction cycle of private equity, sorry, Mark, without doing other things like that. You can partner with folks, as long as you have like-minded investors, to really achieve the full potential of the company that you've built and to have serious legacy preservation, which is critical. And unfortunately, in some cases, when you're selling to a mega public company or whatever, legacy preservation goes out the door. If you're looking for a notch in your belt, I sold for the most amount of money and I don't really care what happens to my company afterwards, there's plenty of capital waiting for you.
So let's think of those two pieces then. One is capability supplement, because I do like this idea of being a strategic owner. Are you the right owner of your asset? One is partly tied towards, do we have the right capabilities for the digital frontier that Aaron mentioned? A second piece is tied towards something about similar incentives or value alignment or something like that. I would imagine the first piece is easier to assess. Right? What are the in-house capabilities that you have? The second piece feels more difficult. How do you actually determine whether a group that could be a minority or majority partner is aligned from a culture standpoint, aligned from a value standpoint? What are the ways to assess that?
Yeah. If it's a professional investor, obviously you can do the technical things like look at their fund structure, how long they have to invest, when they have to harvest, what's their track record with other companies, and have they sold, et cetera. The other is like when you think about it, what is the ethos of the investor, right? What do they care about? And with the prevalence of family offices over the last 2 decades, you're finding a lot of people that better understand what it meant, what it felt like to own and operate a family company. And thus, as they're investing capital now, they understand the long-termism that should come with that. The other thing that you just said, it's like, what's your mentality against debt for debt? Like, are you going to lever us to 6 times? And thus, we're essentially a public company living quarter to quarter, right? There's just a lot of things that you can assess when bringing on a minority investor that really should align with everything you're trying to do. There's so much capital out there now. There are people that align with you. And I would suggest that if you're going to do something that's 50, we're talking 15, 25 year type timelines, not 5, not 7.
Okay. So I want to dig into this idea of truly human leadership for a bit, and essentially your people strategy. Mm-hmm. I think one of the things that stands out to me about Margarita's work is you have to have a compelling people strategy to make someone say, I want to be there. This is the place that I want to be, given a lot of different options. And so this idea of making a firm a valuable place to be, where I say, I want to be here, I want to stay here for a long period of time, has got to be some sort of mix of who the managers are, compensation, benefits, cultural alignment, et cetera. Can you give me a sense on what you think are the right levers to pull around this? And just to give you one context, one data point. There's some work that's being done by the Gates Foundation that's looking at small businesses. And broadly what it finds is that small businesses on average have worse jobs than others. They don't pay as well, the benefits aren't quite as good. There's maybe a lack of ability to kind of move up inside the organization. And so I think one question for those of you that are operators is what can you do to actually make the jobs better? So either inside Barry-Wehmiller or inside some of your investments, what are some of the levers that are pulled to drive that value?
Ooh, how long do we got?
We have approximately
2 minutes.
12
yeah,
minutes.
Yeah, 12 minutes, just kidding.
But I have 12 more questions.
Yeah,
so.
perfect. Culture's a funny thing. It's easy to say, it's hard to do, right? You can talk, most companies you talk, I could interview all of you all, and you'd say, does your company have a great culture? You're like, oh yeah, I've got a great culture, right? And then you go to talk to people and like, well, they don't do this, my parts don't show up on time, all this crap that you hear that kind of nips at the culture. But what I would really say is, we viewed, even when we started our hybrid investing arm, BW Foresight Partners, we talked about financial strategy, acquisition strategy. Cultural strategy was the exact same thing that we talked about. So it is as important as all the other strategies. Now, most people don't talk about that because they're like, I don't have time for that and things like that. But as a long-term investor, building the DNA of a great culture is critical. When you think about small businesses, a 5-person shop is 10, 20. Scale matters. It really does. But it's not everything. And so when you, like McKinsey did this awesome 2x2.
That doesn't sound like McKinsey.
Yeah, it doesn't sound like McKinsey at all. I've never heard of it. But like on one axis, it's what employees want in a future employer, and then what employers think the employees want. And shocking, compensation and benefits are high on what employers think employees want, but what employees really want is a sense of belonging. They want a sense of knowing that the person that they work for actually cares about them. They want a sense that there's something out there bigger than themselves that they're contributing to. So we get into this thing, I got to pay more and I got to be competitive. We have people leaving highly competitive jobs now. Even at scale, you run into competitive issues, especially in St. Louis, which we're changing. But you have people coming to Barry-Wehmiller today that are foregoing big compensation, big things like that, because they understand there's something bigger. They want to know they're valued. They want to know they belong. They want to know that there's an opportunity to put their fingerprints on the transformation of growth, right? And so there's just so much more than like comp and benefits that typically gets brought up. You've got to wrap this cultural element because it's so important. It is, it's just important, but it takes a lot of hard work, and you can't just throw it out when times get tough. That's actually, you got to lean in a bit harder like we did in 08, 09.
Yeah. So I want to go back to the structure of your organization, the ownership structure of your organization, and also some of the ownership structure of those that you're investing in. So imagine that you do decide to find some in between this idea we're 100% family owned and now we're selling the business and we're out. And you take on a minority investment partner or even a majority investment partner. It becomes different. The organization is going to be different. The board structure is going to be different. The capital structure is going to be different. When you see that transition happening, as you think even, again, about Barry-Wehmiller as an entity or some of the investments, what are some of the ways that you create alignment or could create alignment when you decide to land somewhere in between those two poles?
Yeah, cool. In general, and then I'll go BW as an investor and BW as an investment. In general, time horizon alignment. It's got to be there. Equity structure alignment. Most people, professional investors, will come in and put something you've never heard of, a convertible preferred picking instrument, right? What the hell is that, right? Versus just good old-fashioned heads-up investing. I'm going to invest alongside with you. So in general, if you're looking for alignment, horizon, the type of structure, and what do you bring to the table, right? And so when I think about people that are looking for Barry-Wehmiller to come and invest in them, we don't invest in things we don't understand, right? So we bring operational value. We bring people kind of centric initiatives. We don't bring a bunch of leverage. We don't bring short-termism, right? We bring M&A capabilities, right? We only invest in things that we can see, hey, this $50 million business, $100 million business, you're playing in $1 billion potential market. Let us help you get there. And yes, you should take some money off the table and de-risk, but let's let that amount you roll be worth 5 times what you thought you took off the table. And we have case studies that's proven that. As somebody that's had minority investments in us, what am I looking for? Well, we tend to be the operator. So what I'm looking for is time horizon, like-minded investors in terms of an equity structure that's heads up, and then somebody that brings something to the table that we didn't fully appreciate or understand or couldn't have gone after without being pushed outside of our bounds. And so an example would be, we had a large investment by a wealthy family, one of the wealthiest in the world, about 12 or 13 years ago.
Mike Mazzio's family, wasn't it, Mike? Is that your...
Remember, buddy?
Unrelated.
No. They had a board seat, but they invested in the exact same equity I own, the exact same equity our leaders own, et cetera. And they came in and pushed us, right? They're like, have you thought about the customer experience in this way? So they had a big retail presence. Have you thought about how do you digitally enable this organization? Have you thought about 10xing the size of this business? Not like this incremental 10 to 15% growth, but like you are playing in big enough markets. How do you quadruple down on that? And it's that type of thinking that as an organization trying to figure out its next wave of growth was really helpful. It was really helpful to us.
So I want to spend a little time thinking about the time horizon piece, because that's the part that I have the hardest time wrapping my head around. I was presenting out at this group called the Tugboat Institute last summer with a bunch of privately held companies, and I made the case that you need to think about time horizon, but also with rigor. And I think sometimes people see those things as the antithesis. So in other words, if I'm being rigorous, I'm going to think short term, versus if I'm thinking long term, sometimes that could migrate into laziness. Well, it'll eventually work out. Let's just kind of wait for this to actually come out in practice. So if you were to say, I want to have rigors around long time horizon, if an investment group were to say, we want to be long time horizon in our focus, but do so with a level of rigor about how we track that and assess it over time, how do you marry those two pieces together?
Yeah, it's a great question. Then wrap it all with truly human leadership, where people have responsible freedom, and sometimes people can read that culture element like, oh, I'm here for life. You can't be mean to me. You can't expect accountability. And that's not it. And so you have to have a vision, right? So if you understand where you're taking something, whether it's a 5-year, whether it's a 10-year vision, you can operate with rigor within those periods of time. That has never been an issue for us. I mean, we've taken a business from 35 million to 550 million, right? That didn't take laziness, and that was rigor, it was intentionality, it was programmatic, et cetera. And we improved its culture along the way, right? And so it can be done with both. You have to have the right metrics, you have to have the right short-term goals, you have to have the right long-term goals. One of the things that allows us to have a long-term horizon, Peter, is we value our shares, right? So it's a Stern Stewart model, it's discounted cash flow on steroids. But we value our shares every 6 months and allow investors to come in and out of our organization. So I have to perform, and our leaders have to perform for the last dollar that came into our organization, despite having had great returns for the people who've been with us for 20 years. And so when you put that scoreboard up there, when you do things like that, it creates, if you're competitive like me, it creates a wonderful balance of going out and getting after it and producing. The other thing is you got to surround yourself with a pretty cool audience. So bring in great external talent that have fresh eyes. Have an independent board that pushes you in a positive way. And we are fortunate to have an amazing independent board that pushes us in a positive way while understanding we don't have to do anything, this quarter that's stupid, right? Just an example. We bought a business and we had this vision to double it. And we did incredible our first year. In the second year, it was like we wanted to hire 75 people a year. It was a consulting services business in the insurance space. And it was not going quite as well the second year. And I was like, and they called me and they said, hey, should we put the brakes on all this hiring that you wanted to do? And I sat there and I said, did our vision change? Did something happen? He's like, no, the vision, I actually feel better about it. It's like, then why would we stop? And so you can't just say that if you're leveraged 7 times. You can't say that necessarily if you're a public company being scrutinized on every decimal point of EPS. But when you're a family-owned business, you can take that time, and it's not laziness, it's just good strategy, to say, I still believe in the rigor in which we looked at the opportunity ahead of us, that we're going to continue on this plan as stated, and we'll allow short-term performance to suffer so that we can have our long-term gains.
So I want to end with one final question here, and it's really about capital planning. And in particular, what's unique about the family business landscape is you do see some of these conglomerates that are increasingly being split apart in the public markets. So that's the case whether or not you're in India, whether you're in the US. The idea of a broad holding company with different industries, different companies represented. As you walk through that chart of the organization over time, it's becoming increasingly diversified, increasingly across a lot of different areas, different time horizons of what you might expect in terms of returns on those areas. How has your approach to capital planning evolved in response to the increasing complexity of your structure?
Yeah, gosh, were you in my board meeting last week?
Maybe I was. Maybe I was.
Clearly somebody planted something.
I'm also banned by Russia.
Yeah. It's funny because Barry-Wehmiller, if you let it be, can be really complex. If you go back to that kind of pie chart that I showed you, that a third of our business is in 3 defined business models, it's pretty simple. Whether you make a centrifuge for cell and gene therapy that's this big, or a corrugator that's the length of a football field, the business model is exactly the same. That doesn't answer your question. That's just me and my complexity mind trying to make it simple. Capital planning is critical, and how do you put in place long-term financing that allow you to do things? So when we were growing, we would finance every deal as it came up, right? We would get a revolver, and then we'd do another deal. We'd need another revolver, or we'd get term loan, et cetera. And then we started getting into the private placement market, where we have 10, 15-year money that's fixed in price, and it just sits there, and there's no paying it back until it matures. So that's on the financing side. And I would say we always, as most family-owned businesses, the approach is more conservative stance in terms of leverage. And so you have to figure out, to be long-term, what are you going to be able to do to stay private, to stay family-owned? And you start thinking about, okay, how do I create a share price that allows minority investors to come in and out? It allows long-term investors to leave to the extent they're outside their time horizon that they want. And so it's multi-layered. Then you have employee ownership, you have employee grants, et cetera. And all those things work in connection with each other, allows you to attract outside talent. When you get more complex, you need to have more outside talent with incredible capabilities. When you do a bunch of acquisitions, having a currency to use as a private family business with a share price is pretty powerful. It allows you to kind of keep the brakes on too much leverage. And so it's just like, it's so multi-pronged, and it's required because, again, we've got a silver tsunami of investors that are going to want to come out of our organization and need to replace it with future talent, future leaders, et cetera. And so probably didn't answer your how does it handle with complexity? But we are thinking more and more on, there's so much capital out there and so many interesting vehicles. What are things that really do align with our time horizon? Again, one of the best examples is having financing that sits there for 15 years and doesn't really ask you any questions. And that allowed us to really pursue programmatic growth and kind of have a couple of our transformative periods.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Kyle, it's been great to have you up here, and I really appreciate the time sharing through how you've approached it at Barry-Wehmiller. Thanks, everyone.
Pleasure.